Hi everyone. My name is Michelle Valiukenas, and I am the co-founder and executive director of the Colette Louise Tisdahl Foundation. And our organization was named after my daughter Colette, who was born May 23rd of 2018. She was 16 weeks premature and then was in NICU for 9 days before we lost her. Um, and so this is in her memory. Our foundation is trying to improve outcomes of pregnancy, childbirth, prematurity, and infancy, as well as aid in the grieving process through financial assistance, education, and advocacy. What we're probably most known for is our financial assistance program, which is helping families who are in crisis financially due to high risk or complicated pregnancies, NICU stays, or loss. Since we launched in September of 2018, we have helped over 600 families nationwide. We've hit 39 states so far, and we've given away a little over $600,000 in financial assistance. But we also have these education and advocacy pieces that I think kind of get swept off to the side. And so part of my 2021 renewal and everything was to really spend some more time on it. And so I'm really thrilled to have friends of mine and women I just love and admire, Meg McKeen and Erin Brown. And we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, and I'm going to let them introduce it. And we'll then bring it back to parenting and sort of the different stages that of people we're reaching and where that comes into play. So actually, I didn't share this with Meg and Erin, but in doing some like preliminary research and some things for this, I actually found out psychology today recently, I think it was in the last 2 years, they have now referred to something as momposter syndrome. So a play on imposter syndrome, but specifically for mothers. And so I think, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I think that that's something that's really, really important and definitely something that we are seeing more and more of when it comes to parenting. So I will let you guys, whoever is going first, kind of take it away, and I'll obviously be around and we'll kind of have this conversation about everything.
That sounds great. And thank you so much for obviously the intro. So Meg, maybe we'll just do brief intros on ourselves and then we can kind of dive in. So my name's Erin Brown and I'm the founder of a company called Connext. We really focus on better supporting and empowering first time and middle managers in organization. And kind of through that work and my own personal experiences with imposter syndrome was really how I connected with Meg and kind of through both of our entrepreneurial journeys and really intersected on this work with imposter syndrome. And it's something that we're super passionate about and love talking about. And we're really looking forward to having this conversation with you, Michelle, and your community as well. But Meg, I'll turn it over to you and then we can dive on in.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin. And thank you, Michelle. Thank you for this space, this chance to talk about this topic with you. But on a grander scale, thank you for what you're doing, the advocacy and the ways that you're giving back and continuing to live Colette's legacy, which I am so inspired by you. And I know Erin is too. And that we are in this moment having this conversation with you, knowing all of the paths and the journeys we are on. I am grateful. So thank you for that. I am Meg McKeen. I'm the founder of Adjunct Advisors. I offer sales coaching and training to insurance salespeople. And if Erin's work in leadership development and mine in sales, and Michelle, yours in the space that you're creating is not a testament to how prevalent imposter syndrome is, I don't know what is. And I'm amazed every day in having these conversations, how more and more people start nodding and putting their hand up saying, yes, I feel that too. And so that connection and that community in a space like this to have these conversations is really, really important. Erin, I'm going to kick it off with just a little bit of background information about imposter syndrome. It's a term, interestingly, that was coined in the 1970s. The word syndrome is probably not the best way to define the situation using today's language, right? If it were new to our vernacular today, we would probably not call it a syndrome. But one of the things that Erin and I firmly believe in, and it's the core tenet of what we do, is that imposter syndrome is not something that you can cure or that even should be cured. It's a part of our human experience. And what we choose to do and the way we choose to approach it is to bring awareness to it and then help people find the tools that work for them in their unique circumstances to work through it. So not curing it. It's not all bad, but also embracing that it's part of our human experience. And it's really common. 70% of people, all different ages, all different genders, different socioeconomic classes, different cultural backgrounds, report having feelings of imposter syndrome at some point in time. So really prevalent. Look to your left, look to your right. Chances are two of you are feeling it, maybe even in that moment. Erin and I talk all the time about we feel imposter syndrome talking about imposter syndrome, which is one of the most meta examples of imposter syndrome. But with that, Erin, do you want to introduce sort of the academic definition of imposter syndrome, and we'll start to put some framework around it that way?
Yeah. No, and I love your approach on like the not being a syndrome, right? And it's not meant to be a cure, and it's not meant to be something that's wrong with people. I think sometimes there gets to be that misconception that something's wrong with you because you're experiencing these feelings. 100% natural, and as Meg said, part of the human experience. With imposter syndrome, it's really about, I think it can show up in a couple different ways from a definition standpoint. It can be really a doubt in our abilities despite evidence to the contrary, right? Like Michelle, in your case, right? You've impacted 600 different families and done this amazing work with the community, and you've raised all this money and such, but you may, not speaking on your behalf, still have those experiences or those feelings, right? That it's not enough, or that you're a fraud and you're going to be found out, right? And I think that sometimes people think it's exclusively a lack of confidence, but that's really not what it is. It's kind of the specific doubts around abilities, as well as those feelings of being a fraud or being an imposter in any given role that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think it's like the who am I to talk about this, or who am I to do this, like that kind of feeling that I know I definitely feel that all the time. Like, I'll be asked to talk about something, like, who am I to talk about this? And then I have to step back and say, like, no, I have these lived experiences that does make me qualified to do it. But
yeah. Absolutely. And I think a lot of times people can get hung up on this word of like thought leader or expert, right? That we're kind of saying, and no one knows everything, right? That's just kind of recognizing that and kind of what our experience and knowledge that we possess, and especially our personal experiences and kind of what we've gone through, how much value that adds, and not diminishing it. Another way that we do see imposter syndrome show up is really around minimizing success. So maybe it's not even the self-doubt piece of it, or that it's more the I only achieved this because of luck or because someone helped me out. It's really about diminishing the success you have achieved. And I think we see that one as kind of another bucket and way that it shows up. Meg, what would you add to that?
I just never get tired of this conversation, and I love the context here too. I was taking some notes as you were talking, Erin. I think one of the things that we feel when we've achieved that level of success, but we hold ourselves out in the world in a new and different way, is that we tend to almost forget or bypass all the places that we've been. So now we're wearing a new title. It could be professional, it could be a new job or a promotion, or in the parenting world, maybe it's parenting for the first time or experiencing loss for the first time. And so we have a very short memory, and we don't often spend time to aggregate all of the experiences that we've had and really honor them as we look to the future. And that's a huge part of imposter syndrome. It's not a confidence issue, like you said, Erin. We are worthy of the position that we're in, and we've come here legitimately, but yet often have a hard time acknowledging that it's the here and now. So, Michelle, I would love you to weigh in. I want to disclaim, and I'll do this on your behalf, Erin. We are not parents. We have not directly experienced the sort of loss that your community has. And I know that can take a lot of different shapes. And we respect those experiences so sincerely, but cannot relate directly or personally. So we're going to lean on you in this conversation to help draw out some of the parallels so that your audience gets out of this what is beneficial for them. So thank you for doing that.
And happy to do that. I think that this is, and just, to say, like, I have taken probably about this time last year, Erin and Meg had a presentation on imposter syndrome, and it was great. It was totally eye-opening to, like, actually, I think, really name something I had been experiencing my entire life and had experienced in different ways throughout my whole journey. And that was, we struggled with infertility. And so that was feeling like a failure. And, as a woman and as a wife and as everything else. And, then saying things like, which I said out loud all the time, and I said inside myself all the time, which was like, maybe this is the universe telling me I'm not supposed to be a mom. Right. And, and that's not at all anything, like, I know that that's not true. But that was my inner dialogue as I kind of went through all of that. And then finally going through and getting pregnant, and then I miscarried. And so, doing a lot of the what ifs. So, like, if I had done this one thing differently, this would have been what would resulted, right? So, I miscarried, and, I had been completely off of caffeine, and I had gone somewhere and I had had some caffeine. And so to me, I was like, well, see, that one caffeine was what did it, right? Like, that caused miscarriage. And then with Colette's pregnancy, I didn't mention this before, but I was in the hospital with preeclampsia for 3 weeks before she was born. And, again, it was like, if I had just not let work stress me out, or if I had just, been more active, or had realized some warning signs, or any of that. And, it really can take a toll on you, and you can really go down that road of, all of these things. And I think, not knowing the name of it, but my therapist at one point, when I was like, well, if I had done this, and if I had done this, and she finally stopped, and she was like, what if you had done all of that and you still lost Colette? And I just remember having this moment of like, oh, like, nothing had happened that had informed them thing that, like, if I had just done one thing differently. And so I think that was like really, powerful to name. And, now I see this now. I'm parenting my second child, and actively parenting him, and parenting Colette through this foundation. And I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't have at least one of these thoughts related to parenting, and just, all of that. I'm working on, I don't know if I can coin this phrase, but I've decided I'm going to coin it for purposes of this. But I have started calling it, it's the IST syndrome or phenomenon. I'm not sure what I want to do, but it's, trying to be the best, and trying to have the kid that is, the cutest and the smartest and the this and the that. And it just gets overwhelming. And I think that that's where we get caught up in that. So I already said more than I intended to say, but I just started going. So I'm going to turn it back over to you guys.
No, and then obviously I know Meg already said that, with her and I not being parents, I know we're both though very, like, we have our cousins and families and friends and surrounded by, people that are raising young kids. And it seems like how hard moms are on each other, or not on each other, but on themselves, with like everything needing to be perfect or this. And I think, yeah, it's interesting because in the research that Meg and I do, Michelle, you mentioned this with just specifically kind of how the imposter syndrome shows up in parenting and moms in particular, kind of those doubts and those feelings of imposter syndrome. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, and I think that's why when we talk about it, we're always saying it's navigating imposter syndrome in life and in work, right? Because it can show up in so many different areas and shows up so differently for different people too.
So true. I want to honor Michelle. You said that you were working with your therapist, and I want to highlight that. Super, super important. This is a conversation that is often had in that space, and neither Erin nor I, we have backgrounds in financial services, not in mental health. So anecdotal wisdom here. And and likely something that's going to come up in deeper work, right? That we're doing on ourselves as we process these experiences. But just kudos to you for recognizing your need for that help and asking it. You're leading by example for sure. So what I'm hearing you say, and I know Erin's hearing it too, because this is when we're working together with individuals on their own experiences with imposter syndrome. We're looking for different clues and triggers of how it might show up for them. And Michelle, what I'm hearing a little bit from you is the idea of pushing too hard. So continuing to keep going and to keep pushing almost to the point of exhaustion, because you're looking for that outcome that just doesn't seem to be within reach. And
Right.
does that sound right to you? Did
Yeah,
we?
no, I think that that's definitely very right. And I think that that's a lot of what I was saying. So I had shared with Meg and Erin before I started that yesterday I started thinking, and I was like, well, it's not just my experiences, it's the experiences of so many others. And so I just posted something in two social media groups, one related to preemies and NICU parents, and one related to lost parents. And just what I was finding over and over again, and like, as it kind of comes in, I'll share some of like their direct words. But it was just a lot of like, so who am I? And and I think particularly for lost parents, that identity piece is very difficult. And so two of the stories I heard had very similar sentiments of post loss, and so loss of their first child. One person who talked about she went to a Mother's Day brunch at like a country club, and they were handing out roses to moms, and the girl looked at her, didn't see any kids around, and just didn't give her one. And what that means, right? So like you have identified that I'm not a mother, even though I am by every definition of it, and I feel like I am, and you've just ignored it. And then similarly, another woman who said when she was pregnant with her second after loss, that coworker came up and said, oh, you're going to be a mom. And how do you kind of rationalize that? So I think there's a lot of that identity piece. And then I think with NICU parents, and I heard this was sort of like, how am I qualified? Like feeling like she had been at one place where she was getting it, and she was getting her daughter's care, and she was like on top of it, and being switched and not getting that same feeling from her medical staff, and then doubting her own abilities, right? Her own intuition, her own knowledge, that she had probably, pulling from all of this. And so I think that that's, the pushing, and I think then the just identity and doubting ourselves. I think that that's really hard. So
one thing I was hearing is what you just shared was, I would imagine with a child, obviously baby in the NICU, and the doubting, right? You mentioned someone who had the change of, I'm assuming doctor or hospital, but that doubting your own, that what's best for you and your child, and that advocacy, because I think that can be some way imposter syndrome shows up in different ways, or in different arenas, I guess I should say, but that it's that doubting the ability to advocate for yourself and ask for what you need and want in that moment, and what is best for you, if it's that situation, or best for your child, if it's obviously in the situation you just shared. So I think, and even before what you shared, is I love the work you're doing, because I think that's awareness piece, right? That story like broke my heart with right, with giving out the roses, right? But it's like an awareness thing, right? And I think kind of increasing that too in the work, and having conversations like this too, so people can support and show up in a different, more supportive way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think layering on that, Michelle, I have learned so much about the language to use to support those who I love in my world who are experiencing what you and your community members have, because it isn't my experience, right? I'm so, I want to be supportive, right? And I want to say the right thing. And I am learning so much about phrasing and behavior based on your actions. So thank you for that. But it's also a really important reminder that we might not feel loss. We might not feel imposter syndrome, but it is so highly likely that someone we know is affected, probably not the best word, but impacted deeply. And what does having this awareness of ourselves and how we show up in the world, what can it do to contribute to a better experience for them in that moment? And that is, it's not more powerful than the deep personal work, but when you think about your opportunity to affect and be impactful to the greater community, that's it, right? Just having this extra dialed up sense of what, my goodness, what that person who delivered that rose could learn from hearing your story, right? And how different they might show up in the world as a result. So painful for you, right? To have to be the one to educate, but also really powerful.
Right. Yeah. And so, anybody who watches this and knows me, and Meg and Erin, I think know this, is I'm very direct and blunt, and I don't, I don't shy away from saying things. So I have definitely been in different situations, the summer after Colette died. I ran around to every doctor I could possibly imagine because I was going to find the reason why all of this had happened so it didn't happen again. Right. And of course, they found like nothing, right? And nothing that they could find. And to this day, I still don't know. There's, theories and little like, well, this, your age increased it, but there's no really good answer. And at one point I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and the medical assistant was doing something to set up like the machine for like whatever. And she said, she looked at my chart and she said, "Oh, you have a girl at home." And I said, "Yeah, she died," because I just was not, I didn't want to have this. And so while I was waiting, she basically, she like looked at me wide eyed and she backed out of the room and like didn't say anything. And I messaged my husband and I said, "God, I kind of feel awful that I was that blunt." Right. And and he said, "Yeah, but she's never going to make that mistake again." And I was like, well, all right, that's true. But I think, even in that moment, right, like that was really hard for me to like hear that reminder of, by all accounts, I should have had a girl at home with me, right? And I didn't. And yet I was still worried about what she would have thought, right? And, and similar, the Rose story, the woman who shared it said she ended up getting up and going to where the roses were and grabbing a rose for herself. And I was like, more power to you. But then she talked about that she had this feeling of afterwards of like, that they must have thought she was a brat because she wasn't a mom. So why was she doing this? And why was she taking one of the roses? And so I think that's like another facet of imposter syndrome, of like, we're sort of apologizing for our behavior and how it affects other people, without realizing that like that's not something that we should be worried about, to that extent. And I do think that that's something we do. I think we also, you talked about, Meg, minimizing, and I see this all the time in loss and NICU. I am part of a support group for lost parents that meets virtually now in COVID every other week. And I see this over and over again, is that we will have moms or dads who have had a miscarriage and they will call it, "Well, I just had a miscarriage," when they compare it to this. Or they will say like, "I don't know what you've been through because I've only been through this." And I hear a lot of that. And, I'm sort of in a unique position in that I had a miscarriage and I know what that is like. And I've had an infant death and I know what that is like. And they're both really difficult experiences, and they're very different from each other. And there are things that were easier in a miscarriage versus losing Colette, and there were things that were harder in losing, in a miscarriage than losing Colette. And I think that that's really problematic. But I think, again, it's just right, we minimize our successes, but we also minimize our low points, right? And so instead of saying like, I had a miscarriage, it's like, well, I just had a miscarriage, or, you know, I only had one miscarriage and you've had 2 or 3, like those kinds of things. And it's like a loss is a loss is a loss. And that's not anything we're trying to do it. And I see that in NICU as well. You know, my child was only in NICU for 2 weeks, and, you know, that's exhausting. Like, and there's a meme I know I've shared that says, you know, 2 days or 200 days. NICU is stressful. And that's very true, and something that like we do have to realize about that, and what that means.
I know, kind of with what you were talking about, and even before you just shared what you shared, I was thinking about like that comparison piece that's so common. I think in imposter syndrome, but even just like what they call it like now, comparisonitis, I think is like a new term that they're talking about. And I think, as we know, Michelle, you know, we will go through every group. We can't not talk about Brene Brown, but she talks a lot about that, like comparative pain or suffering or trauma, you know, and I think it's so, we all naturally do it, right? It's like, it wasn't as bad as this, or it wasn't, you know, as bad as that, but it really, as you said and shared, Michelle, it really just minimizes what we're going through. And really, there's nothing, I think, good comes from that minimizing, right? Because it's not lessening someone else's pain and what they're going through, you know, and so, yeah.
Michelle, I'm curious from your vantage point. You've done this work in imposter syndrome. You've maintained a curiosity about the topic. When you think about the willingness of others in your community to share their stories with the potential that they could help others in sharing their stories, do you think imposter syndrome plays into that, their willingness to share or not share? Or just in general, can you talk a little bit more about why, you know, I'm a storyteller, right? Give me a microphone and I don't stop talking. And I do believe it's the stories that connect us, but it still feels very much like we experience this grief solo or
Right.
with our partner. And what comes with that is a whole other host of emotions. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there definitely is that, you know, and I've seen it where, you know, we try to have guest blogs and other perspectives, because sometimes I feel like people are probably tired of hearing from me, because I'm very similar. And this is part of the reason why Meg and Erin are friends of mine, is like, yeah, I'll talk until like I'm, you know, passing out of lack of air, and I'll write and I do all those things because I think it's really important. But we're not really talking about it. And some of it is just, you know, apart from imposter syndrome, of there's still a lot of stigma over talking about death in general, and especially when we talk about death of babies, that we don't want to do, right? And so like, because it's uncomfortable, we want to like package that up nicely in a bow and just like put it off to the side. And, you know, we still have a okay, now you can move on from this, you know, perspective in our society. And I think that that's harmful to the grieving process. And but it still exists. But I think with imposter syndrome is, you know, people will say like, well, I'm just not that clear cut about what I'm trying to say. Or, you know, I struggle with this. I met a woman fairly early on who said, I struggle with saying my son's name. Like, that is hurtful and it's hard. And so that prevented her from saying, you know, from really talking about her loss and her experience. And it was like, what if you just said my son or the baby or whatever it needed to do? Like, it doesn't matter. Use the language you need to use. And, you know, that is what I think it is it's just those examples of like, and that fear, you know, especially about talking something so vulnerable, that fear of, oh my God, what will other people think? What will other people feel when I do this? And, you know, I know that there were people in my world. So we used a gestational carrier for our second child. And to me, it was very important because when I started thinking about this, it was, I didn't know where to start in a lot of ways. And So I wanted to be very open about the process, and I still am, and I'm always happy to talk about it because I think it's one of those processes that was successful and like that I'm so glad we did for ourselves. And that I'm not the only one, right? Like we are not the only couple who found that that was like what we needed at that time to grow our family. And so I don't want it to be. But I plan to blog about the entire pregnancy, which meant I shared our news of being pregnant very early on. So it was definitely before the 12 weeks. I think we were about 6 weeks pregnant when I shared. And I know there were people in my world who thought that that was like a horrible thing to do. Um, I I paused, before doing that. Like I paused about blogging. I knew I wanted to, but I paused. Um, and really had to talk about myself. So I do think definitely just like, who am I to say this? What will other people think if I say this? All of that. And the funny thing is thinking back about it now is just how many, like, I didn't actually hear the negative, right? I heard the like extremely positive and the helpful and all of that. And including somebody that reached out to me after my son Elliot was born and said, I followed your blog all the way through, and actually we want to go forward with surrogacy. And so who is actually, she just announced, so is actually her surrogate is pregnant, and so they're expecting. But like that was super exciting to learn that. And so I think like, sometimes letting go of that is so scary, of the like kind of close your eyes and jump, and not know what's going to happen. And the funny thing is I hear this and I just think like, I mean, there are women who get pregnant again after having a NICU baby, after having loss, after, all of that. Like that is amazing that people do that. And, that they kind of get back on the proverbial horse. Yet we still have these like, oh, but I can't talk about that because that would be too much or whatever. And so I think that that's, it's just it's a difficult thing to do, but yeah.
That vulnerability is not easy. And I feel that so deeply. And I know you do as a creator of information and forums, and Erin's doing the same thing in the community that she's building. And when you position yourself as the bringer together of people and ideas and thoughts, it's a lot of pressure. And there are moments where it's like, you know what, it would just be easier if I just let somebody else do it. And I just echo the knowing you've reached one person makes it all worth it. I also want to add a little context around that annoying little voice on your shoulder. Imposter syndrome speak would call that your inner critic. And I would be curious in this community who that inner critic is when you want to tell that story or you want to share your good news. Is it a mother-in-law? Is it a neighbor? Is it a sibling? Is it your own past experience telling you you've been here before, you shouldn't do this, this is dangerous for you? That inner critic is there to protect you, so to speak. It's a little counterintuitive, but it's there to keep you safe. And so anything that it views as being harmful or potentially so, it's going to shoot up big red warning flags saying don't do it. And for some people it's a person, and others it's just a combination of all the places we've been and all the feelings we've felt and all the experiences we've had. And one of the things that we love about the work we do is when you name it, sometimes it's a name, but or when you recognize it, you can choose a different path through it or with it alongside, and you can sort of put it back in its place. One of the things that we talk about a lot are different tools that you can use in your toolbox that you can draw on at different times when you're feeling these sort of impostery, fraudy feelings, as we call them. And what I love about them is they're not one size fits all, and they don't work in every scenario, and they don't work for everyone in every scenario. And one of the first the first ones that I want to love is meditation. I want to be a meditator. Is that a thing? A meditator? But I just can't quiet
I'm with
the
you.
mind, right?
I'm with you. It's very hard
I'd
for
rather
me.
just stare out the window for 20 minutes than try to, and it's not, trust me, like I've invested in it, I've tried it and I'm not given up. But I also think for me in moments, I'm a fan of the mantra. I'm a fan of whatever that string of 5 or 6 words are that I need to hear in that moment. You are made for this is one of the things that comes up often for me, especially when I'm challenging myself in business. Ask for what you want is one that comes up in my personal life a lot. I have a whole lot easier time asking for what I want in business than what I do out of my personal relationships. That's a topic for a whole different discussion. However, the point is we can draw from these very relevant and personal phrases in those moments when we're realizing, oop, there's that inner critic. What do I need in order to quiet that so that I can continue to move forward? It's noisy in there. Like this stuff is real. It is real. And Erin, maybe I'm overstepping, but maybe it's worth saying there are plenty of people, contributors out in the world that are adding another level to this discussion around imposter syndrome and really acknowledging that it exists within the systems, within our culture and in our environments, whether it's the workplace or personal. And so it can come across as sort of asking the victim to fix or to work on him or herself while the system is happening around them. We don't necessarily we agree, right? We got some system stuff going on that we're keenly aware of. And I think we all are to some degree. What we can control in this moment is ourselves, right? And the outcomes that we want and the work that we do. And so that's where we focus, is on that very individual level. But there's a long way to go in society, in our the way we relate as human beings as we talk about human biology, right? And we start to unpack the shame and the feelings of responsibility that we have, that we attach to these experiences. And I'm here for it, right? Like I don't know how else to say it, but these are really important conversations that we're having.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I do want to piggyback on that, because I think it's really important in this moment, particularly for sort of the maternal infant health world, is we have stark differences. I mean, just this week, I believe it was, the CDC finally declared racism as a public health crisis. And, I think that's really true. And I think we are seeing that in a lot of different facets, in a lot of different ways. But I think one of the ways that I think it's so important is, people are tired and doctors are not, like, the systems are broken. So, if you are only spending 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is with a doctor, like that doctor cannot pick up things and you are not feeling comfortable to share things, right? And I think that that's a broken part of our healthcare system, is that we don't get the care and the attention that we need. And that is a large part of it. And I think when we add in things, that there are certain populations, and Black women, unfortunately, being one of them, that are not heard and that are ignored, or their experiences are minimized. I think that that's where we result with, and the statistics have been slightly different. It depends on how you look at it. But Black women are 2 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth. So pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum. And part of that is, like, I don't think that they're being listened to in that immediacy to the same extent that a white woman would be listened to. And that's a problem. And I'm glad that the CDC has finally declared it and done that, because it's really, that's something. And I think this broke my heart, but about 2 years ago, I read this article, which was basically an article to Black moms saying what they should put into their record when they disagree with a doctor's finding. And the idea was to make sure that their record was complete in case there was a maternal mortality, and that the review boards could see things. And so saying things like, I am asking and you are refusing to do X test, and those kinds of things. And like that is really powerful. And so, but I know this, I've met plenty of moms who, are amazing women, but are afraid to say that to a doctor. And, I think that that's really something that's so important for us to all, say that we are willing to say that, and to ask for the accommodations that we need that make us feel better about our health and all of that. And I think that's really, quite hard for a lot of us to be able to do that.
Absolutely, Michelle. And I just read an article about that today with the CDC declaring, racism, obviously the public health, which long overdue, obviously, but also in parallel, was they were talking about the U.S. and having such a high level of, maternal fatalities and deaths compared to other developed countries. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's just, as we kind of talk about kind of what, imposter syndrome and the self-advocacy piece, it's so important, right? To be able to advocate for ourselves and say what we need. And it's especially when you're going up against, a position of authority, right? And like with whether it's, obviously in this case, a doctor, but it could be in any type of role. It makes it that much more challenging, if you're kind of dealing with these thoughts and feelings.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things we talk about when we're talking about practical, sort of where do we go from here ideas, is accountability. And so having someone that is with you on this journey that can hold you accountable when you're feeling those feelings, or when you're finding yourself holding back or pushing too hard, or perfectionism, we've kind of danced around, but that's a huge sign or symptom of imposter syndrome, is just the check and the double check and the making sure that everything is just so. It's exhausting. But having someone who knows that you're on this journey, and I'm thinking, Michelle, as you shared that, and Erin, your feedback as well, how different the experience might be if you had someone either sitting with you in that appointment, or someone who was following up with you 20 minutes after and going to ask you, now, did you get these 5 questions answered? And fundamentally, and I don't know the research behind it, but believe it to be true based on my own experience, we are more likely to keep the promises we make to others than we are to ourselves. I don't love that, but that seems to be the way it plays out. So if there was someone who was counting on that information from you, might you be more diligent about asking for it? And it's tough. The overarching theme here is that this is work, and that this is a journey, and this is about awareness and making different choices, and that we're not going to solve it all in one sitting. As much as we want to read the book or listen to the podcast or watch the YouTube video like this one, it's very much a journey. So all of those experiences, they matter.
Yeah. And I would say, specific to some of the pregnancy and childbirth things, I think, and I am working on currently to have for some later videos and things like that, is I think the importance of doulas, right? And these are, social support people that can be in the journey, right? And through pregnancy, through childbirth, and postpartum. But I think just, to have that other person who knows the system a little bit better, doesn't have that same thing, is trained, and hopefully is not having those same feelings as you are, who might be able to ask the question for you, or really push you to how can you ask it in a way that's going to be well received, and that kind of thing. So I think that that's really important. And then the other thing that I would say, like, I wrote down this quote, and I think about this all the time, is I saw this, it's like, there's a million ways to be a good parent, and no way to be a perfect parent. And I think that that's like really true. And at some point in this, I was thinking about the first time I had to give my son a bath, right? Like, my mother and my mother-in-law talked about, like, that this was a really fun experience. And I put him in, and he screamed his head off. And I just was like, oh my God, baby, I'm so sorry, honey, I'm so sorry. And like, we're going to get through this as fast as we possibly can. And I did. And I like handed him over to my husband, and I sat on the bathroom floor and sobbed, because I thought I was a bad mother, and I had, completely traumatized my child to a point where it was ridiculous. And, then reached out to fellow moms who almost overwhelmingly were like, yeah, the bath time sucks. Like, just don't even worry about it. Like, bath time is going to suck right now. And, I think that that's always something that's like honesty is key. And we ended up doing it. Like, I hated bath time. I hated doing bath time. He didn't really love it, whatever. And one day I said to my husband, I said, maybe you should do bath time. And he said, okay, sure. Mark, my husband, now does bath time with our son. Like, and I do the afterwards, like I get him ready and I do this. And, if he's, now he loves it at 9 months, but, now like if he's upset, I knew how to calm him down and I knew how to get into that space. And so we just played to our strengths. But I think that honesty is key. Sometimes I think, with parenting, especially, right? We see celebrities who talk about all these different things they're doing. When they're asked, like, how do you do it all? Or how do you have it all? They're not answering honestly, right? And like, they're saying things like, well, I work really hard, or I wake up a little bit earlier. They're not telling you that they have, an army of help. And that makes a difference. I was thinking of a colleague and a friend of mine one day sent me a message and said, how are you doing all these things with the foundation? And you had, and at the time, I think Elliot was about 3 months old, and you have a 3-month-old at home. And like, how are you doing this? And I said, I don't know how I'm doing this. I said, but I have a really amazing partner and he is very helpful. And, Elliot is a fairly easy child in some grand scheme of things. And also my house is a mess right now. And so she laughed and she said, well, we're preparing to move, so I can't let the house be a mess. And I was like, so then something else is dropping, right? Like, that's okay. And that kind of thing. And when the mess bothers me, I'll address it and something else will have to drop a little bit, and that kind of thing. But I think that's so important, is just that we're honest. There is no such thing as having it all. Like, that's a bunch of phooey. And just that we're honest with each other about what is going on kind of behind the scenes. And I like, in COVID, I've seen some pictures of like, women who on the Zoom look perfect, and when you scan back out, right, like the kids are downstairs, are down on the ground, and like Cheerios are smashed and this and that, and there's a mess, and there's a pet in the background and all of that stuff. And that's okay. Like, that's life, and it's messy, and it's, but I think we need to be more honest with ourselves about that.
I love that, Michelle. And I'm going to jump in, obviously different lens, different perspective, but I'm with you 1,000,000%. When I think about, COVID's been this really interesting period where, because we don't have access to each other like we once did, and we have to be very intentional, and now we're in sort of the re-entering phase, who we choose to spend time with and what that time looks like is going to be fascinating as a human. I wonder how many friendships will just no longer be friendships, no longer, they'll just not have withstood the COVID test of time. But with that, as I start to think about my relationships and those that have become stronger in this time and those that I want to continue to pursue outside of the pandemic, so to speak, they are the people who have been the most authentic, the most real, the most raw during the last 15 months. And the ones who will, Erin's one of them. She's my accountability buddy who will pop the hood on their own mess. And I'm not implying you have a mess, Erin, but who are willing to say, I don't have it all figured out. It's messy and it's clumsy and I'm in the thick of it and I'm here, but it's messy. It's when people present their best self 100% of the time, I think what happens is they repel exactly who it is they want to reach, whatever the motivation, right? Business wise or personal wise. And I've experienced that both ways, in both segments of my life. And I've just been observing, and now I'm choosing to participate in the after in a little different way and think about who's really let me see her or him for who they are, and just how much deeper and richer those connections are. It's not a judgment either way, but letting go of that perfectionism, both having to be perfect and also expecting that of others has really changed, I think, the way for me, my relationships have flourished, but also I hope for others too. So I love that you brought that up. And I find it fascinating just how all interwoven all this stuff is, right? It all comes from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I echo what you both shared. I think that honesty and that vulnerability and just the knowing you're not alone, whether it's you're dealing with imposter syndrome, whether you're dealing with a loss, whether you're dealing with you're launching a new business and you're scared out of your mind. People relate, right, so much to the honest experiences, the fear, the pain, and I think over the past with social media, right, everything's been so curated for so long, and we're always comparing our worst to everyone else's best. And, no one, very few people are putting their worst out on social. And it's even myself included, right? Like it was like I spent a lot of time traveling and stuff. And it was always my best travel photos. They didn't see the 85 other photos it took and the missed trains, although I did get better at telling those stories, right? But that's what people relate to. And I think that's one thing I'm grateful for with COVID is I think when we got a kind of a sneak peek behind the lens of everyone's lives and we realized that, hey, people are really just people. And I think it's so easy to forget that, especially like in a professional setting, too, when you're kind of, might be more tempting to keep those walls up between people. I think they came down a little bit over the last year, which I hope we keep as we move forward.
Right. And I think we didn't totally touch on perfectionism, but like Meg said, I sort of danced around it, but I think what you perceive as perfectionism, that's not what other people see. And so my example of that recently was I was here one night and in the room that we usually have our little one in, there were toys literally everywhere, right? And just, so it'd be 3 toys here and 2 toys here and everything, right? And so any parent who is listening to this probably knows what that's like. And I had looked at it one night after he had gone to bed and thought, oh my God, I have to pick up everything. And I was like, I gotta make time tomorrow to do this and whatever. And I'm sort of beating myself up a little bit about it. And then I had a cousin who had to come over unexpectedly the very next day after I had had this conversation. And we were talking and he was remarking about how much my son was moving around and crawling around and all of that. And he said, well, see, one of the good things that you have is that because you have toys all over, he's motivated to crawl to the toys and whatever. And I was like, I just remember in this moment of being like, yep, that's exactly how I planned it, right? That's not at all how I planned it, but okay, great. That's what he saw. And you know what? There is probably a lot of truth in that, that's how it is. And so, it's how we're all going to grow and do stuff. And, and that I stepped back and thought about it and thought, I'd rather have a kid who grows up in a little bit of a messy house than who feels like they can't touch anything in a house. So, okay, fine. And those kinds of things. But I just had to laugh about that where I was like, here I am thinking and I remember he wasn't expected to come over. And I remember thinking oh my God, and sort of trying to do quick cleanup before he came and the whole thing. And he saw it in a totally different way than I was seeing it.
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about before. We're our own worst critics, right? With the inner critic, and no one else is seeing usually what we're seeing, right? They're seeing the good in us and in the situation around us. And yeah, so I love that you shared that.
Yeah. And what is that adage? I'm going to get it wrong. Something about people aren't paying nearly as much attention to us as we think they are. It's some cute little, cliche thing, but where I love what I was thinking about as you were telling your story, Michelle, is this idea of if only you could see yourself the way the world sees you, and that the minutia, the specks of dust or the toys underfoot, that is just not the essence of what you contribute to the world, right? And so we get so hyper focused on those details and making sure that everything is just so that we're so close to it, we can't see it.
Right.
It really makes us great. But yeah, I I love those stories. And I also think, especially, we're all women of a sort of middle age here, so I don't want to make any implications, but we had our growing up experience, and now we're in a position to shape this next chapter of our lives. And Michelle, you're in a really cool spot to be able to make that look however you want. Right. And what you create is going to be the memories that your son has. And that's really powerful. And it's also can be really freeing when we think about some of those, just the beliefs, right? And the ideals that we think should continue to be true. We've got a lot more freedom and flexibility in there than we often think we do or give ourselves credit for. So I think I'm betting on Elliot here. I think he's gonna be a happy camper, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And we, similarly to what you're saying about like, other people perceiving us, I think it's also how we talk to ourselves. And so like, I know in the lost community, we say this a lot, is if we could talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a friend, how much better off we would be. Right. And I've caught myself in different groups of telling people like, you can't think that way and this and that. And then internally saying, I do this to myself all the time. Like, why couldn't I say what I just said to this person in my own head? And I think that that's so important. And I think that accountability piece is really important, of having those people in your lives who are going to, when you have those doubts, who are going to say, come on, like, take a step back. And like, if I was having that problem, would you tell me this? And, chances are probably no. And, you can kind of have that moment of like, oh, aha, light bulb. This is not the way I should be talking to myself.
No, absolutely. I saw this video, it just made me think of it, Michelle, as you were sharing, is there was they had I think they were teen girls, probably late teen girls, and they each had younger sisters, and they were had these teen girls kind of like write everything down that they felt about themselves, right? And these were not good things, like I'm too fat, I'm not smart enough, like all like those worst thoughts, right? That especially in your teen years you have at any time. And then they like had their little sisters read kind of how they saw them and write down how they saw them. And so when they brought them together, they were like, they asked the older girl, I want you to read what you wrote about yourself as though you were saying it to your little sister about them. And they all refused. They just look horrified that they were like, I can't say that. I can't do that. It's so awful. And they're like, and then they had the little sisters say like how they see their big sisters. And it was heartbreaking and heartwarming, at the same time, but it really kind of shined that light on kind of what we say to ourselves versus what we would say to others, Michelle, like you talked about with your like friend, or, how the world sees us too.
Right. And I think, I took mastermind imposter syndrome. I can't remember the name of it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, with Meg and Erin. And, what was interesting is that, people were talking about how, people they look up to also are suffering from imposter syndrome. Right. So I think that kind of like clear cut of like, looking at people and saying like, well, they have the perfect whatever, and realizing like, that's not how they feel, even if that's how you perceive it. That's not how they're feeling. And, kind of having those conversations, I think that's like super eye-opening, to realize that, everyone is having it and everyone is unsure of what they're doing. And, we're all human and trying to figure it out as we go. And
And I think you captured the power of this conversation, I think, with that, because I think not only with ourselves, but I know with kind of your community with parents, and recognizing it, because kids experience it, teens experience it, obviously friends, colleagues experience it, and the kind of the equal power of seeing it in other people and being able to support them and navigating it as well, kind of in their own personal lives.
So do you guys have any closing thoughts, any tips about like moving forward? I think we've talked a lot about sort of what it is and how it shows up, and maybe a little bit about like what to do with it, but any other tips that you guys would have?
Yeah, I think number one is maintaining that awareness and also taking peace in the awareness that it's okay. And this doesn't have to mean hard stops in our thought processes and our decision making. And that you are on a journey and you will, this is not, to reiterate, it's that you're, and it's actually part of what makes us empathetic people, that feeling empathetic people to have difficult subjects like the one that you're addressing every day in the work you do, Michelle. So there's no magic formula. I wish there was for everything that ails us. I wish. But no, thank you for holding this space. Erin, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I echo kind of what you said, the awareness, and I think, especially for me, and this is more coming from personal, the awareness of those inner critic thoughts and feelings and being able to kind of recognize them in the moment, and then kind of, whether it's a mantra or whether it's just kind of stopping it and kind of preventing yourself from going down that spiral. But unless you're aware of it and you recognize it, you can't really change course, right? So I think that's such a great point. And then the second one, as Meg talked about earlier, that accountability buddy, your imposter syndrome buddy, whatever that looks like for you, I would say that's probably in the people we talk to and the work we do the most impactful, piece of it, because you have someone who in those moments can help you navigate through, and you may need them less and less over time as you learn kind of what works best for you. But when you're doing that work, I think it's just incredibly powerful.
And I think that that's like a great tip to end on, because I do spend a lot of time talking about the sort of, it takes a village to raise a child, or it takes a village to get pregnant. Like, I think I use it in everything. So I think, that's a great thing. It's like, it takes a village to survive. I mean, right? Like, let's call it what it is. So yeah, so I think that's great. I want to thank you guys both incredibly. I love you both. I miss you all, and I hate just seeing you guys on Zoom, but I would just want to thank you guys so much for taking the time and doing this, and being just amazing people. And that is always helpful. So I hope soon we will all be able to see each other in person and not behind cameras. But this is still lovely to see you guys this way. So I really just want to thank you guys. And then I want to encourage anybody who's watching this. You can visit us online. It's Colette Louise, or Colette, sorry, www.colette, 1L, 2 T's, Louise.com. And you can visit us, and you can also find us on social media. And we would love to continue this conversation if there's interest. And I think Meg and Erin are open to joining us again and kind of helping us facilitate this. Or I've just volunteered them, either way. Yeah, so thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. We love the conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right.